Okay, recording. Hi. So this is letter number 7. I was so afraid I surrendered. Hello. I'm sorry it's been a while since I last wrote. So much has happened since the last letter and I wanted to actually, tell you about it right away, but I had so many thoughts, so many things going on that I figured if I wrote to you right away, I might just be all over the place. So I decided to take a little time and reflect a little bit on what had happened. In my previous letter, I spoke about the wave of fear that came over me when I thought that I had broken my shoulder. I spoke about the intense wave of fear that came over me. I spoke about the worry I was going through and the thoughts in my head. I, I had scheduled the doctor's appointment, but of course, the doctor couldn't see me right away. And there was quite a bit of time before I could go and see her. And honestly, that time, that waiting, was a very difficult and intense period for me. During those days while I was waiting, I noticed that my mind was so talkative. Sometimes it would even attack me. I noticed the voice in the head saying, broken shoulder, that's all? Man, there's so many people in the world that have bigger problems than a broken shoulder. Man up. Surgery, that's nothing. It was difficult listening to that voice. But then I decided not to listen. I was feeling what I was feeling, and instead I decided to treat myself with a bit more compassion, to hold those thoughts in my consciousness, and to breathe into it, to treat it with some tenderness and respect. The fear that I was feeling was so real and so intense. Honestly, it took off my entire bandwidth. I felt like, how could I function? How could I do my day-to-day tasks, right? So instead, what I decided to do was to retreat inward, to go back inside me, to be in silence, and to take care of the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts that were welling up inside me so strong. As the feelings arose, the feeling of nervousness and fear, as the thoughts arose, worst case scenario planning, guilt tripping, I just took each moment whatever was coming up and just held it tenderly in my consciousness and breathing into it. In my meditation, I remember the gatha that um, one of my teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, taught, where when you would breathe in, you would say, breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. And I would do this. But the fear would be so intense, which was almost all the time in those days leading up to my appointment. I just ended up sitting. And I sat a whole lot. Honestly, I've never meditated that much before, right? That's how intense the fear was. That's how constant the fear was. But I came home to myself. I came home to my true home, remembering what Thich Nhat Hanh said, that when you feel like the storm is too much, come home to yourself, come home to your true home. And I did that. In my meditation, normally I'd sit for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on how busy my day is. But in those few days, even after the final bell would ring, signaling the end of my sitting session, I didn't want to go out because, somehow I felt safe, right? I mean, the fear was there, the thoughts were there, but I felt safe inside. I just wanted to stay there. I didn't want to leave because I was afraid that, when I would come back to the real world, what would be waiting for me there, right? Of course, eventually I would have to go out, I would have to, you know, do my responsibilities in the real world. But what happened was kind of cool, the peace that I felt inside, somehow or the other, also came with me when I went about my normal day and doing my duties and responsibilities. And I was very, very grateful for that. All of a sudden, that gatha, I have arrived, I am home, it kind of took on a deeper meaning. I really felt like, inside, in that silence, when the mind finally calmed down, the voice, the talking voice slowed down, and the emotions calmed, in that silence, it really did feel like home. I remember the dream I had when I was a little boy. In that dream, I was, in these woods, and the woods were bathed in a really soft light, and everything felt so calm and so quiet in those woods. It kind of felt, I guess, for lack of a better word, like ethereal. And in those woods, I felt the presence of somebody. There was somebody else there. There was a lady. I didn't see her, but eventually I heard her. She was singing this beautiful song. I I couldn't hear what word she was saying. I didn't know what the song was. I just knew that, you know, this lady was the one singing. I just felt her presence. And I could hear the beautiful song somewhere in the distance echoing, and the light, the soft light, it was really peaceful. And that dream stayed with me all throughout my life, right? During those days of meditation, I realized that when I would come home to myself, the peace that I felt in meditation was almost like that peace that I felt in that dream. It felt like a really safe space where I was cradled and protected by love. When I was in college, the song Gethsemane from the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar, deeply resonated with me, especially, in times of trouble. But I realized that back then, I think the part that resonated with me, maybe the part that I was drawn to, was the angry part of the song. When Jesus would say and shout, "All right, just watch me die." And I think back then my surrender was that kind of surrender. It was a surrender in it was a surrender in anger. It was a surrender of like, you want to break me? All right, break me. I was angry. I was very, very angry. That was the only part that I guess I really focused on. But this time around, my surrender, I feel like, was different. Like in the song, after he's shouting, then the song gets silent again. And now it's him talking to God again. And when the anger was gone, it became a more serene surrender, a real surrender from the heart. And I realized that about myself, how I was back then, and I guess how I was surrendering now. After my meditations, I would usually say a prayer, and I would surrender. I would say, I don't understand why this is happening, but I will follow where you take me. Whatever happens, whatever I need to do, or whatever needs to be done, whatever news she gives me, the doctor that is. My answer is yes. I have complete trust in you. On the eve of the day where I had my doctor's appointment, my wife said, let's have a family prayer. And so my son prayed first, and then my wife afterwards. And then I said the closing prayer. my prayer was a prayer of surrender. I prayed to him and I said, God, whatever happens, wherever you want to take me, my answer to you is yes, yes, yes. I will follow you fully. But then, of course, I added, but I'm sorry, you know. And if I might humbly ask, if it's okay with you, can you grant me a miracle? In those days leading up to that appointment, I never asked for anything. It was just surrender, surrender, surrender. And this was the only time that I had asked. And then I ended with, but whatever your will is, whatever you want me to do, if it's not the miracle that somehow I'm hoping for, I'm okay. I really found peace in that surrender. I really did. It got me through those days. So I finally went to see the doctor the day of the appointment. I was very nervous, as you might imagine. It was so cold in the doctor's office, you know. And despite that, when I arrived, I was, sweating profusely, out of nervousness, right? My pits were so sweaty. I went back into meditation. I went back home, and in my meditation and in the silence, I continuously gave my surrender and my yes and my yes and my yes. And finally, I got called up. They were like, okay, sir, your turn. Please come. Let's take the x-ray. Oh my goodness. Went up to the x-ray room. They were taking the x-rays. I was so nervous. I was sure. I knew. I thought that, what? The likelihood that I might need surgery, I think, is really quite high. But whenever those thoughts would come into my head, I would just say, whatever your will is, yes, yes, yes. Finally, I went back down, and the doctor called me in, and, when I walked in, my x-ray was sitting right there, on the screen. I was so scared, right? Because I could see. And I don't know how to read an x-ray, right? But I was like looking at it and I was trying to see if I could find, any cracks in the bones. I saw some weird gaps, right? But then for a moment, my heart jumped to my throat and I was just like, oh my God, is that gap, did my bones separate there or, or is that natural, right? But I just breathe, get quiet, breathe, breathe, breathe. And lo and behold, I mean, the doctor took a look at it and she was like, taking a look at this. Nothing's broken. There's nothing broken. And oh my goodness, the wave of relief that fell over me. I don't know, maybe to somebody else, might seem quite minor. But to me, at that moment, I felt touched by God. I felt an answered prayer. I felt His love. I decided to walk home from the hospital. It wasn't too much of a far walk, but still quite a walk. But I guess there was this immense feeling flowing out of me. I just needed to walk, right? And in my walk home, I was so filled with gratitude for an answered prayer. And walking home, I just kept saying, yes, 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 yes to you. So it's been a few weeks since that time, and normal life has come back again. And honestly, the clarity of that moment has been harder to reach. But you know what? My gratitude has only deepened. My surrender has only deepened. And my desire to come home again has only grown deeper. I want to know him more deeply. I want to be home.